First guest this morning is Marie Sanderson, former policy director with the Republican Governors Association, the RGA. She is a GOP strategist as well. Good morning, Marie.
Good morning, Richard. How are you?
Great. Appreciate some of your time as you join us from our nation's capital this morning. Have you spent any time around Caroline Levitt?
I have not, but I have a number of colleagues who have been in her orbit, and she is just a star. She is young, she is fierce, and she is smart. She's a communicator. She understands the president, and she's loyal, and man, is she doing an amazing job.
It really is incredible. I mean, almost on a daily basis, when you watch these White House press briefings, and the fact that they're happening on a daily basis, we're not only hearing from the press secretary, but the president himself on a daily basis is kind of incredible in his own right. But watching her navigate the White House press corps and really not taking anything from anybody has been incredibly impressive.
It is impressive. It's impressive what they've done across the entire communications vertical at the White House. They have, and we saw this in the campaign, they have pushed traditional media out the door, and they have found a way for the president and his surrogates to communicate directly with people. We're doing that on social media. We're doing it through being really accessible at the White House press conferences and making them available to everyone. Caroline does a MAGA Minute, which is kind of a wrap up of what happened every week. So no matter where you consume your media, and no matter what type of personality or demographic you identify with, they are reaching those people.
I'm intrigued in your perspective as a former policy director with the RGA, shaping the message, shaping the policy that Republican governors are trying to implement or were trying to implement in their roles. Watching the job that Stephen Miller is doing, you know that better than most that being a policy director and kind of laying out a platform is not the same thing as implementing a platform and following through on that. And when you watch Stephen Miller, who we've seen in a lot of press conferences and a lot of one-on-one interviews, his ability to lay out the agenda, but then also follow through or have others follow through on what that agenda is. What's your take on that side of the kind of the business of politics that's happening right now?
Well, let me first say that Stephen Miller is very smart. He is one of the smartest people in this country, and he not only believes in helping President Trump achieve his agenda, he now knows how to do it. There's no question that when the president announced his chief of staff, Susie Wiles, who also, by the way, is doing an incredible job, the next announcement was Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller. Stephen is controlling the policy operation, but more importantly, when I've run transitions for governors, and I have done that a number of times, you always want to make sure that your cabinet respects your chief of staff and your chief policy director, or whatever that title may be, because at the end of the day, the president expects his key staff to work with his cabinet to move the agenda. And Trump 1.0, there were a lot of cabinet officials who kind of had their own personalities. I'm being a little diplomatic about that, but clearly that didn't work out so well. We could go through all of those former cabinet officials. In Trump 2.0, everyone who was put in that role were loyal to Trump. They're change agents. And I give a ton of credit to Stephen and Susie for really being thoughtful in who they put in those roles for the president.
I'm glad you brought up Susie Wiles. I have said, and you and I may have even talked about this the last time we visited, that outside of perhaps J.D. Vance, I think she's the most important person in this administration. I had someone tell me over the weekend that so apparently there's a weekly lunch with the Republican caucus, and Susie Wiles was invited as the guest speaker a week or two ago. And there were a number of legislators who were kind of, this is behind closed doors. It's not for everybody to consume. And there were a number of legislators that were kind of, I don't know if attacking is the right word, but were being a little aggressive with their questions with her about tariffs. And she kind of shut the whole thing down by saying, look, every one of you has my cell phone number. If you've got a specific question, call me. We'll talk about it. But all we're doing is wasting time here. Is there other business to get to? How is it that she is operating on a daily basis? I thought that was just a little bit of a glimpse kind of behind the curtain as to the way she's handling legislators and the way she's trying to keep things moving forward.
Well, I think she gets to operate in a place where the president said what he was going to do when he ran for president, and now is doing what he said he was going to do. He's not doing anything that the American voters didn't vote him in office. So the tariffs were already always part of the equation. We know that's how he negotiates. The Senate knows. I assume it was with the Senate breakfast knows
Yeah.
that she. That's how he negotiates, and they've been through this before. And look, there's so much to cover, particularly as it relates to funding our government, which is probably what she wanted to turn the conversation to is, are you going to pass the CR? What are we going to do with reconciliation and all these other really important things, Congress, that you need to be doing? Leave the tariffs to me and the Department of Commerce and the president to figure out. But look, he said he was going to do this. And so we're seeing these 100 days immigration reform, trade reform. You can just keep going on down. All the things he said he was going to do, he's doing. And the American people are giving him high marks for it. The recent polling has his approval up. And look, if you're a Democrat right now, you're trying to get your footing. We're trying to figure out what you're for and what you're against at this point.
Let's stick with the tariff conversation just for a second, because I think there are a lot of reasonable people that can look at this and say, okay, one, it's a negotiating tool. Two, it's about leveling the playing field for the United States. But there is the chance, and maybe we're even already seeing it, for real pain for a lot of groups. And some of those groups are affected in Mississippi. I mean, the farm community in Mississippi is looking at this, looking at exports, most of which go to foreign countries. The shipping community is looking at this and looking at massive price hikes. What's the balance here between this is good policy and it's going to be short-term pain for a long-term payoff versus there are entire industries that are being crippled as we go through this process?
Well, that's a great question, and I do a lot of work on these issues. Look, I have the long-term view. I believe that this is going to settle out. The president's going to negotiate with countries, and the tariffs will settle out. They are taking stakeholder meetings. They're trying to understand supply chains, and I have a longer-term view on this. That things will settle out. I will say that the president's very concerned about the economy. He's watching the markets. So I think his advisors are keenly aware of some of these challenges. But again, he said he was going to do this. He's trying to find where the United States needs to be in the world economy. And he feels like some things need to be right sized. And I think we're going to see that in the short term. Clearly, Congress is concerned. Obviously, our senators and our congressmen from Mississippi are probably communicating to the president that we have some businesses that are really concerned about their ability to compete. But I have just the longer term view, Richard, that this is going to settle out in the long term, and the president and his advisors have the end in sight.
Visiting with Marie Sanderson, GOP strategist, former policy director with the RGA. Have you got time to hang with us through the break and spend a few more minutes visiting?
Yeah,
okay.
absolutely.
I know you got a busy day in D.C. and don't want to hold you up. Several things I'd love to talk about on the other side of this. One of those things is the change in funding that we're going to see at the state level, and kind of how that pertains to Mississippi in this conversation about tax reform, federal assistance that is coming to the state level. I will ask you, we've only got 30 seconds or so until the break. When you look at the tax reform debate that's happening in Mississippi, do you fall on one side or the other of this debate about the elimination of income tax?
I'm absolutely for the elimination of income tax. Absolutely for that. I think that would be good for our state, and our neighbors are doing it, and I absolutely am for that.
All right, we'll talk about what some of the cuts at the federal level might mean for Mississippi on the other side of this break. Visiting with Marie Sanderson, really sharp political mind. She's in Washington, D.C., former policy director for the Republican Governors Association. She's been a political strategist for a long time. We got more coming up with you. Mornings with Richard Cross, SuperTalk Mississippi. Quick time out, more with Marie on the other side of this break. Don't go anywhere. You want to jump in the conversation, you've got it. C-Spire text line, 601-879-4395. This is Mornings with Richard Cross on SuperTalk Mississippi. Marie Sanderson is my guest as we start things off. Busy rest of the show today. She is former policy director for the RGA, GOP strategist in Washington, D.C. this morning, and kind enough to spend a few minutes with us. Marie, I was mentioning before the break, we know that Mississippi, like most states, is reliant on federal funding. Some say Mississippi more reliant than other states. Medicare, Medicaid is a program that appears to be in line for reform. There are people that have talked about a block grant where, hey, here's your amount of money, figure out how to spend it. The rest of it's on you. The elimination of the Department of Education. And I feel like not much ado about nothing, but we don't rely nearly as much on federal dollars for state education funding as some people want you to believe. So when we're talking about tax reform and we're talking about revenue going down because of an elimination of the state income tax and perhaps a change in the way federal money is allocated, what's your level of concern in balancing those things, revenue versus expenditures at the state level?
Well, there's nothing worse than a backseat quarterback. So I'm not going to backseat quarterback for the legislature. But, the president has said he's not going to cut Medicaid. I do think that he's going to make reforms to the program. When I worked for, this is going to date me, but when I worked for Governor Barber in 2010, he went up to Capitol Hill, led a group of Republican governors and said, look, we can take a reduction in money to Mississippi. We can find savings. And so he worked at the time to say, we can take a 2.5% cut over time and absorb that. And so, look, states have waste. We know that whether you like Doge or dislike Doge, there are a lot of things that they're finding that is showing that there's waste in our system. As it relates to tax reform, again, I worked on this in 2007 when Governor Barber ran it. I had the ability and the pleasure of staffing Mr. Leland Speed, who chaired that for Governor Barber at the time. And our recommendations back then were to reduce the income tax and to phase it in. A lot of states are doing this. You're seeing people with high disposable income around the country moving to places with low income tax. That's what they're doing. On the other side of the coin, do you have to raise taxes in other places? Perhaps. But you're seeing more and more that we shouldn't tax income, that we should encourage people to work. And that's what allows wealth to be created in these states and ultimately creates more taxpayer funding to help improve services around the state.
I was having a conversation with a legislator in Mississippi yesterday, and this person said that, I'm just not thrilled about the idea of raising sales tax. And I said, well, I kind of look at the sales tax piece of it and say, okay, I'm paying for something that I'm buying. I'm paying for a service here. I'm okay with that if you take away the income tax piece of it. And this legislator said there just don't seem to be that many Mississippians that are jumping up and down saying, we've got to eliminate the state income tax, although there's a pretty different message, especially coming from the House side in Mississippi with regard to eliminating the income tax.
Look, it might be a balance. And again, I'm not involved in negotiations, so I don't want to, provide opinions. And those in the legislature are going to do what they think is best for the state. But anytime you can reduce the tax burden, that's a very good thing. Our neighboring states are doing that. And I'm absolutely for what they think we can afford. Will there be uncertainty at the federal level? I do think that things are going to change, but more importantly, I think things are going to change in how we spend money. There'll be more transparency. The states will have more authority, and those are all good things for our state and for states across the country.
Let's take a peek quickly at the judiciary right now. We're seeing district court judges, unelected but rather appointed district court judges, making rulings that overrule the executive branch, specifically the president. The most recent one has to do with deportations and these flights to El Salvador with illegal immigrants. What is your take on some of the judicial overreach that many people are calling it that we're seeing right now, and this balance of power between the judicial branch and the executive branch?
People argue about the power of the courts all the time. The irony is that the left is so much better at this than we are, whether it be stopping environmental permitting, stopping what President Trump is doing, some of the social changes. The courts have always been more so lately activist courts. So, look, you're seeing that. I'm not surprised at all. And where they choose to have these cases depends on the makeup of the courts in certain areas. I think a lot of us will go to the Supreme Court, so it'll be interesting to see how that phases out. We've always had this battle, and we've always had the left has always been better at this than we are, and in some ways we're catching up to some of this on our side. But when you have someone in the White House, you're always going to have the other side throw whatever they can, and right now the only thing they have left is to throw the courts at the president.
You know, it's interesting to me when I hear you say this is going to go, most of these things are going to go to the Supreme Court. And I agree with you that that's where they're going to end up. And there are a lot of people on the right that feel like, okay, maybe that's a good thing, because it feels like the balance in the Supreme Court right now leans a little more conservative. And yet, some of the recent rulings that we have seen, especially with Amy Coney Barrett kind of turning into a swing vote, perhaps leaning a little less conservative. I know it's supposed to be nonpartisan. We all know that's a myth. When you see some of these decisions heading to the Supreme Court, do you see a positive outcome largely for the Trump administration?
I think more often than not we will. Sure, some of these you know, justices have different opinions than we thought they would. But I think the Supreme Court is much better now than it would have been if we had a Democrat in the White House if Hillary Clinton would have won. So I think we just have to wait and see what happens. That's why it's so important to have a Republican president, a Republican Senate to confirm conservative judges, not only at the Supreme Court, but throughout the court system across the country.
I know I'm peppering you with a number of issues. Let's hit on a couple of foreign policy things, and then we'll cut you loose. And certainly, again, appreciate your time this morning. Israel launching strikes against Gaza. It appears that the ceasefire negotiations were not going the way that they wanted. The hostages were not being released as quickly as many expected they would be or should have been. And Israel kind of re-engaging with those airstrikes on Gaza. Where does this go?
Look, I trust the president and his team. He's looking for peace. I think that region of the country is so troubled. You hope that we head towards a ceasefire, and I think Secretary Rubio, the president, and others who are negotiating, and more so just from a prayer standpoint, the deeply religious, and that's such an important part of our faith, is that part of the country, and I pray that the Trump and his staff are going to negotiate a peace there. That's my hope.
You mentioned Marco Rubio, and he was of the cabinet officials. He was confirmed unanimously. I guess it was 99-0. He didn't vote for himself in the confirmation process. How do you grade what he has done in that position as Secretary of State over the last couple of months?
I think Secretary Rubio, despite what people say that he's not of the MAGA brand, is doing a great job channeling the president's vision. A lot of people trust him. He had large roles in foreign policy in the Senate, and so a lot of people who are trying to understand President Trump and his views about foreign policy and national security are happy that Secretary Rubio is at the table. He has a good team. He's sort of like a lot of these cabinet officials. They surrounded themselves with good people, and I'm very comfortable with the value that Secretary Rubio brings to these conversations.
And then last thing, we've seen the Houthis with kind of rattling cages, and they're saying the United States can't be in the Red Sea and other parts of that part of the world, and push back pretty strongly on that. I don't even know what country they're representing. When you have a terrorist organization that says you can't do this, we seem to push back pretty strongly. In terms of that part of the world, and it's so intertwined, right, with Russia and Ukraine and everything else that's going on, is there a clear message that the United States is sending?
Peace through strength. I think the president, has said, America first. We're going to be strong. We're going to get back to where we were, where people believed that if they messed with the United States, that was the wrong thing to do. So I think he's showing we have strength, we have power. I want peace, but you're not going to mess with the United States. And redefining this group as a terrorist organization and going on offense is very much on brand for Trump. And so I'm sure we'll see more of that as he tries to protect United States interests across the world.
Maria, always enjoy the conversation. Thanks so much for your time. Safe travels to you, and I look forward to visiting soon.
Thanks, Richard. Have a great day.
Marie Sanderson, former policy director with the RGA, political strategist, joining us from Washington, D.C. this morning. We'll take a quick time out. We've got a whole lot more coming up with you as we make our way through, about halfway through Mornings with Richard Cross on this Tuesday morning. Don't forget, C Spire text line is open to you at 601-879-4395. Give your business the edge with Gigabit Fiber Internet. Haley Fisackerly joins us next, President and CEO of Entergy Mississippi. What's going on at Entergy in the wake of this weekend's storms, tornadoes across the Magnolia State? We'll get to that next on MRC.